Greetings learners, my name is Chantal Oliphant, and today our lesson will focus on cartoon analysis. So let's dig right in. Let's see where cartoon analysis fits in to our curriculum scope. So remember, we are doing reading, but our specific target area for today will be on visual text. All right, so we're going to look at visual text. Now, what are we going to be breaking down? We're going to be looking at features of the cartoon. We are going to look at the integration of the visual elements. Now remember, visual, what you can see, all right, what you are able to behold, and then we are going to look at cartoon analysis, how to break this down, all right. So by the end of the lesson, what will I be able to do? You'll be able to explain humor as well as the detail of a cartoon, right? You will be able to understand and identify the features of cartoons. You'll recognize the use of emotive language, describe the visual as well as verbal cues when analyzing cartoons. Also, you'll be able to identify techniques while you're analyzing, as well as answering questions based on those specific cartoons. Let's quickly look at terminology or language that you will encounter in the lesson. So we're going to look at cartoon humor, and remember, this is dry humor, all right? It's not going to be ha-ha funny. You're going to have to find the irony, the satire, or the dry humor of the cartoon. We're going to look at gestures, tone, verbal communication, as well as non-verbal communication. So see how we made a distinction between verbal and non-verbal, all right? Let's move on. What should you know, right? So you should know the features of the cartoon, interpret and understand the humor, do the cartoon analysis effectively, and respond to questions. So in grade 12, we hone these skills. So we need you to identify, analyze, and evaluate the visual elements, the message of the cartoon, as well as practicing cartoon techniques. Right, some critical errors. Learners find it difficult to recognize the features of a cartoon, the skill to respond to questions, the correct vocabulary to describe what they see, and interpret facial as well as body gestures, all right? And difficulty in expressing the humor. So what do I need? I need the following skills in order to be able to respond to questions relating to a cartoon. And we remember, we want to focus on analyzing, interpreting, and finding the humor in cartoons. And that, learners, takes us to a short ad break. Learners, welcome back from your short ad break. We will now dig into the features of a cartoon. Right. So what are the problems that we encounter? So many times learners are unable to identify the features of the cartoon, and because of that, they are not able to respond to questions appropriately, right? So let's look at the features of the cartoon. What features do cartoons have that are identifiable? So let's look at the frames first. Remember, your frame can be one frame or there can be a series of them, all right? Your font, how bold are they? Look at the size, is it capitals or small letters? And also look at jagged font, all right? Because that normally indicates a particular message that the cartoonist wants to convey. Please look at the punchline, all right? Your punchline is the build-up of events. So the series of the frames in the cartoon builds up to a particular punchline. Your setting is normally where and when this cartoon takes place, and that creates the context for this cartoon. Look at movement, okay? This is normally indicated by vertical, curved, or diagonal lines, and speedy action is normally indicated by streaky lines, All right. Another feature is your language. Look at punctuation, look at figures of speech, look at the persuasive quality of words. What is being conveyed by the way the words are written and printed, all right? And then look at your characters. It's the people that you see, the people that are acting out the motions in the cartoon. Look at caricatures, all right? So this is normally people presented in a strange, odd, or funny way, all right? And also look at body language of these characters, all right? Let's move on. So this question says, comment on the effect of the features in this cartoon, all right? So just from looking at it, let's see. We first have the bold font, all right? So this bold font is communicating a message because that's why the cartoonist presented it in that way. Moving on, look at our body language in frame 1 as well as frame 2. Okay, can you see the smiling face in frame 1? Look at those eyes. Look at the exaggerated movement in frame 2. Okay, we are indicating our frames in this instance. Look at the 4 frames indicated by the cartoonist, okay? In frame 2, please take note of the jagged speech bubble. Why are those words put in that jagged way? Punctuation, I want you to take note of the question mark used with an exclamation. Please take note, learners, this is used in cartoons only, so we try not to use this in formal writing, okay? And then moving on, look at the asterisks, all right? It indicates something. The cartoonist put it there for a reason. So remember, when we're identifying features, we look at all these little aspects that contribute to the humor. Look at the setting. The setting is only identified in the last frame. So why does the cartoonist do this? What is he trying to tell us, all right? And then our characters, we see a woman and a boy, all right? So when you're analyzing in the exams or in a test setting, please make sure you look at these features, all right? So remember, we were posed a question. Let's look at our responses, okay? We're moving on. Bold font in frame 1. So the bold font here indicates that loud chopping of the hammer. So the whop, whop, whop sound, all right? You can almost hear the sound as it's being emphasized. In frame 2, look at the shouting or the exclaimed voice for the jagged bubble, all right? The asterisk in frame 3 is Calvin thinking. So look at the words they're giving you: thinking, pondering, contemplating. So there's some thought process happening, all right? Look at the punchline created in frame 4. And that is where we're going to find our humor. We know that there are 4 frames as indicated earlier, right? And then look at the effect achieved for frame 4. Your setting is the lounge table, all right? So we see the couch, we see the coffee table, we even see the little portrait hanging against the wall, okay? So the cartoonist very cleverly only revealed the setting in the last frame in order to create the humor. The punctuation, the exclamation mark, all right, emphasizes the diction, how the words are said, so it adds to tone, all right. The characters are the boy, which is Calvin, and the woman would be his mother, all right. And in frame 2, look at the body language. The arms are outstretched. Her mouth is wide open, the eyes enlarged, okay. She's in a running motion. So this indicates her urgency and her desperation. Okay, now that we've covered that, let's look at the integration of the visual elements, all right? Now remember, your visuals are observables, what you can see. Okay, so what are we challenged with, all right? Many times learners cannot interpret the visual elements of the cartoon, and they lack the vocabulary to describe it. So they're misreading the persuasive language. And if you're unable to do this, it's very difficult to respond to questions, all right? Now, before I go into the visual and verbal clues, let's quickly look at the purpose of a cartoon, all right? Remember, it's drawn humorously, all right? And I'm circling that word because remember, you need to find the humor. So many times learners are saying, but we can't find the humor. I'm reiterating, it is not ha-ha funny. It's going to be ironically funny, or there's going to be dry humor, which means you need to dig in to find it, all right? Remember, it is to highlight a current or a social political issue, okay? So if you look at maybe elections, then they'll take a political figure and they'll highlight a cartoon or a humorous event around it, okay? So now that we've got the purpose out of the way, let's look at visual clues, verbal clues, all right? Remember, visual, observable, what we can see, and then verbal, the words that are written, okay? So let's see if we are able to find these in how the cartoon is integrated, okay? Let's look at our first aspect. So I'm looking at facial expressions here, and I've specifically focused on the mouth. So look at the mouth and how it's drawn, okay, to indicate surprise or uncertainty, disgust or disappointment, all right? Sadness or disapproval. So look at the way the cartoonist represents the mouth. Let's move on. Look at the body language for the hands specifically, anger, warning, friendliness. Look at the openness or the closeness of the fist, the pointed finger, all right? Our next element, look at the body language, all right? When you're guarded or challenging, when you're open or showing interest, all right? When you have fear and frustration, look at the clasp of the hands in front of the face, all right? Our last aspect is looking at the eyes and the way the eyes are drawn. Look at the confused look in the eyes when it's drawn together, all right? When the eyes are popping, look at the fear or the fright and the surprise or shock. So look at the different aspects specifically for body language, all right? Now let's look at verbal cues and how they've been integrated, okay? Remember, your most common one is your satire, irony, sarcasm, and your pun, okay? So that is the use of figures of speech. The animata, remember, these are the squiggles or those lines that are drawn to indicate confusion, sleeping, your light bulb, or the indication of anger. Right. In your verbal clues, remember there's repetition, imperative, or tone. So look at how the cartoonist has drawn Fred Bassett being scolded by his owner and use of those punctuation marks there. In the last visual, it shows you the language reflects values and attitudes like sexism, racism, or even stereotypes. And look at the artist being very cleverly putting a hammer and a toilet brush to represent man and woman. Okay, let's move on and respond to this question. So the question says, can you respond to the features of this cartoon? So in the cartoon, we see a boy and his mom, and they have a computer problem, all right? So as we move on, it says, give one visual clue that describes Jeremy's attitude to his mother's computer problem. So if we look at the visual clues, Jeremy is sitting there rather bored, all right? He's not interested. And in the response it shows, he's not even looking at her while he's speaking. He just continues to read his book, all right? Can I move on to another question? Explain the function of the words outside of the speech bubble. So why has the cartoonist indicated words outside of the speech bubble? So it shows there that it's the sound of the typing and the clicking of the mouse, all right? And that indicates that he is not interested in her, but rather busily fixing the problem of his mother's computer. That, learners, takes us to another ad break. Welcome back, learners. I hope you enjoyed your little snack break. We are now going to be moving on, and our last aspect is our cartoon analysis, right? So remember, you must be able to analyze a cartoon and use the correct vocabulary to describe what you're seeing, all right? And also be able to respond to questions. So you may lose marks in the exams or in a test when you're unable to do this correctly, all right? So this is what we're going to dig in now. We will now be looking at the cartoon analysis and the aspects we need to pay attention to. We need to look at punctuation and how it has been used. Remember, words are said in a certain way in the cartoon. Take note of the figures of speech, your satire, your irony, your pun. Remember, this contributes to the humor as well as the emotive language that the cartoonist uses. Understand how the frames and the cartoon, the sequence in which it is set out, how does that impact the message that the cartoonist wants to drive home? Remember, your font sizes as well has a different impact, all right? Pay attention to how the language and the characters work together. Remember, what they say and how they say it and the way the body language is presented all contributes to the message and the humor in the cartoon. Understand how the humor is achieved. Remember, there's a punchline, and that punchline needs to be reached in order for the cartoon to achieve its purpose. Understand what is shown in the verbal as well as visual clues. Now remember, we distinctly identified your verbal and visual clues, right? Understand what message the punchline in the cartoon means. So that's where the humor is derived from. Okay, let's move on to a question and see if we are able to find the features of the cartoon, all right, and also how to analyze it. So our first question says, refer to frames 1 and 2. Now remember, we're locating you in the cartoon. So we don't want you to look at the other frames. We want your attention to be drawn to the frame 1 as well as frame 2, okay? So in frame 1 and 2, right, the man speaking, which is Fred Bassett's owner, says, and another thing, how many times have I told you not to dig in my vegetable patch? And the flower beds. Then, on top of that, you drag mud all over the furniture. So, remember, how does the cartoonist show that the man is angry with his dog? In your answer, consider both the man's words as well as his body language, all right? So, when we look at the response, it says, the man waves his finger. So clearly, that is an indication of body language, all right? And then also, we can see the animata around the pointed finger, which means that finger is actually moving. It's not stationary. The animata shows you the movement of that finger, all right? And also in frame 2, look at the movement of the hand, okay? Then we get to consider his words as well, or the verbal clues. So the word says, all right, do not go into my vegetable patch or the flower beds, and then you drag this mud all over my furniture. So if we look at his face, it looks rather angry. Look at the mouth, look at the eyes, all right? Also, the shouting tone is indicated by the use of those punctuation marks there, all right? I'm going to indicate it. Can you see your question mark as well as the exclamation mark? And then the use of the capital letters shows or drives home the point that he is not satisfied with his pet. He is pretty angry right now. Okay. Let's move on to our next question, all right? 1.2 says, refer to frame 4. Choose the correct answer to complete the following sentence. The sentence reads, I switched off ages ago. Suggest that the dog is ... our ellipses, all right? And our options are indifferent, self-conscious, embarrassed, and guilty. Now, you might not know what all of these mean, all right? So locate yourself in the cartoon. It says refer to frame 4. So you go to frame 4 and you have to zoom in on that area. So it says you have to choose the correct word to complete the sentence. So you might not know what all of those words mean, but look at how Fred is communicating, all right? So in this instance, we call that a thought bubble. It's not something spoken, it's what he's thinking. So we label that a thought bubble. So Fred says, I switched off ages ago, which means that he's heard all the arguments that is presented by his owner, and he's now saying, but you've done this before, and I just continue my behavior, all right? So what does that communicate about what he's thinking, what he's feeling, all right? Is he self-conscious? Can't be, all right? So it's definitely not that one. Is Fred embarrassed? He is definitely not feeling embarrassed, all right? Now, there are two options that we might consider here, guilty and indifferent, all right? If he says he switched off ages ago, he is not feeling guilt at all. He's thinking, I'm so validated in what I did. So that leaves us with the correct answer, which is indifferent. Okay, so see the process that you need to go through when you do a multiple choice question. You always cancel out the two options that are obviously wrong, and then there are going to be two options that are quite close. And then you have to interpret what you have in front of you in order to get to the correct answer, all right? I want you to take note, remember that when we have animals represented in cartoons, they will have thought bubbles and not necessarily speech bubbles, okay? Remember, whenever you have a question with an ellipsis, it means that you have to complete that sentence, all right? So because the sentence is incomplete, it needs to come from the answer that is given, all right? Let's move on to our next question. It says, refer to frame 3. Why are the words my chair repeated? Now, repeated means it's used twice or more than twice, all right? So if we're locating it, we're specifically looking at frame 3, all right? And it says, all over my chair, not your chair, all right? And if you look at the animator, the hand is moving again. So it's showing you, it's indicating something, it's adding value to the words that are being spoken, all right? And in this case, I want you to take note of all the punctuation marks because it's short, succinct sentences and it's punctuated with the exclamation, which means that each sentence is being exclaimed, all right? The voice is exhilarated, all right? It is emphasizing that he's not happy that Fred is using his chair. And when you look at the response, it says, the words are repeated to show how angry the man is. It's to drive home the point, you cannot be sitting on my chair, all right? Or, the man wants Fred to feel really sorry for what he's done, all right? So we know from the message in the cartoon that Fred is not really feeling sorry, but this is what his owner wants to communicate to him, all right? Or, the man wants to emphasize to Fred that the chair belongs to him and not to his pet. So to drive home this point, the cartoonist allows the character to say the words repeatedly so that this point is driven home. Okay, so now you've conquered how to answer a question where words or diction is repeated. All right. We're going to look at a practice question, and it says, refer to frame 3. To whom does the phrase, my someone, refer? All right, so remember, we're locating ourselves in the question, so it says frame 3. Now remember, learners, this here is not considered a frame. This is the title as well as the name of the cartoonist. So remember, do not count your title and the frame of the cartoonist's name as a frame, all right? So we're going to go, this will be our frame 1, this will be frame 2, and that will be frame 3. So this is where we have to locate ourselves, all right? So whom does the phrase, my someone, refer to? The problem is, sometimes my someone forgets to take care of me, all right? So remember, the dog is not speaking, he's thinking, so it's in a thought bubble rather than a speech bubble, all right? So let's see what our response is going to give us. The solution? The word refers to Hagar, the dog's owner, all right? So my someone is showing that the dog has an affectionate relationship with his owner, okay? Let's move on to our next question. Refer to frame 4. So remember, now we're going to frame 4, which is right there. It says, name 2 ways in which the cartoonist shows the reader that the dog is very hungry, all right? So if you're looking at beside the question, all right, first look at your clues and see if you can find anything. So the dog's thought bubble says, I'm starved, all right? So already, even before you get to the responding, you look at the visual clues that's given in the question. And it says there, I'm starved. And look how starved is written. Capital letters, bold font, and the exclamation mark. So let's see if our response includes any of that. And there you have it. The word starved is written in bold font. So already we see the emphasis on it, right? The exclamation mark emphasizes the dog's hunger. So to add on to the fact that this dog is very hungry, we've added an exclamation mark. Not we, the cartoonist. The dog thinks his master has forgotten his dinner again, so his face suggests that he's sad. His eyes are looking rather droopy, okay? He's in need of sustenance, okay? Right, in frame 8, okay, so let's locate ourselves again. We are going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that was 4, 5, 6, 7, so this is the frame 8 right there, okay? How does this dog feel at this point? Now remember, when you're talking feeling, we're looking at persuasive language, we're looking at emotive language. So what is he feeling? All right, so remember, cartoonists use visual clues, all right? So we can see the dog bouncing along. We see the little heart, okay? So in our response, something is going to be mentioned about what the visual clue shows you. So he's very happy and full of love for his owner, okay? And let's see if we can identify at this point, all right, how do you know that this dog is feeling that way? So remember how we've circled your visual clues? His legs are off the ground, the way he's running with excitement. He's not even touching the ground. He's floating. He's on cloud 9. And he's suggesting that he's running after his master in excitement, all right? So the solution doesn't mention the little heart above the dog's head, but you can mention that because it would be included as something visual, something you can see. All right, we're moving on to 1.4. Explain how this cartoon makes you feel about Hager. Now remember that Hager is the owner of the dog, all right? And how does this make you feel about him? Now remember, explaining, let's just break down our question quickly. Explain, which means you're going to have to give reasons for. Motivate why this is happening. So what must we motivate? We must motivate how the cartoon makes you feel. And remember, here we have to give an emotive word. We have to explain why we feel this way, okay? So when you're looking at this cartoon, remember, when we go to frame 9, which is here, we actually see that Hager doesn't interpret why the dog is barking, all right? Hager seems to miss the point here because he's interpreting the fact that the dog barked in order to be put out, all right? So that he could relieve himself instead of him feeding the dog again. So remember, we're looking at feeling words. It's how do you feel? All right, the person reading, the target audience, how are you feeling about this cartoon? So let's look at our response. The solution says, I feel angry, because remember, you as the reader, you need to respond about how you feel. So you feel angry and you feel disappointed. So there you can look out for your feeling words, angry and disturbed. Remember, the question wanted you to link feeling words. So there's your feeling words, angry and disturbed. That he shows no care or concern for his dog, which depends on him, all right? So the dog can't feed himself. He needs his owner to feed him, all right? So this is what you need to highlight. Please take note just on a language point. Remember which we use for animals or objects and who is used for persons. So when you're responding, please take note of the which and the who when you're responding to questions, all right? Can we move on to our next question? It says, Do you think the cartoon conveys an important message to readers? Give a reason for your answer. Now, this is your yes or no response, okay? Now, remember, learners, when you're answering yes or no, you have to write your yes or no as well as a reason to support why you're saying so, all right? Because that's where the mark is going to come from. So let's break down our question. Do you think, all right? So after you've judged what you've read in the cartoon, what message does it leave you with, all right? How does it impact the way you think? And then the important message to the readers. So remember, cartoons are always written for a purpose. It's conveying a social or political comment, all right? So what comment is this cartoonist making? What is it trying to convey, okay? And remember, you have to give a reason for your answer. So the reason is not necessarily in the cartoon, but it's derived from the message that is shaped by what the cartoon has portrayed. All right, so let's look at our response. Our solution says yes. So remember, it's a yes or no response. You have to agree or disagree with what is being said. So in this instance, you're saying yes. It is important to take responsibility for your pets, which means if you want a pet, you need to understand there's care that is needed. Or yes, the comment being made is that people often take care of their own needs and neglect the needs of their pets, which means they take care of what they want from the pet, as long as the pet is there for them, and they're not seeing to the needs of the pet. Now remember, you can't say no. The cartoon is only meant to entertain and to create humor, and it's not necessarily what is happening, all right? So remember, when you are responding to a question that says, do you, all right, you have to give me, the paper needs to be answered in a yes or no response, and then give a reason for why you made that choice. Okay, that brings us to a little ad break, so we will join you shortly. Welcome back, learners, from your little snack break. We will now continue and dig into our practice questions for cartoon analysis. So let's look at this one, all right? We have 3 frames, all right? We can mark it quickly, label it 1, frame 2, and frame 3, all right? We've got our characters. The setting is definitely a soccer field or some game that's being played, all right? And we will quickly dig into our question. And our question reads, refer to frame 1. Identify the sport that Andy and Chalky are talking about, and you need to give 2 reasons for your answers, all right? So normally what you need to do is just try to locate yourself. So the location says frame 1. So this is where we begin targeting, all right? And then how do we know which sport they're talking about? So remember, we have to find visual clues in this case, all right? And let's look at what our response identifies. It says, there's a soccer or football goal post in the frame, which we have identified there, all right? There's a corner flag, which we've identified there. They have soccer boots, all right? As you can see, look at the clothes they're wearing. It looks like gear, all right? Looks like soccer gear. And then the use of the words in the text there says a goalie or a goal post, all right? So any of those 2 would have earned you 2 marks. And remember, we are analyzing the verbal as well as the visual cues and then learning to respond to questions. So there you've got 1 under the belt already. Let's move on. Refer to frame 1. Andy's feeling towards Chalky is, now remember, whenever you have feeling, you're looking at the emotive or persuasive language, all right? Let's locate it. It says we are going to frame 1, so this is where we're going to focus. Now, remember, whenever you do a multiple choice question, there are 2 options that are going to be totally off and 2 options that will be closely linked together. So already we know, is it a fiction, a doesn't sound like affection, all right? Because he's, Chalky's saying, I'm sorry, Andy. I've never played a goalie before, so I doubt whether that's affection, all right? Despair might be this one, all right? So we've decided that one is out. Is it jealousy? Can't be. Is it anger? Can't be. So already you've come up with options even before you've given your response, all right? Remember, you have to give a reason for your answer here. So let's see what our response identifies. So, okay, he's feeling, let me see, he's feeling anger, all right? Can we make a correction on that one? He's feeling anger. And then also, Chalky made them lose the match. So he wasn't playing the goalie very well. He didn't do very well what he was supposed to do. And Andy is not impressed with him. All right? Learners, let me just correct that. Andy's feelings towards Chalky is anger and not despair. All right? I misinterpreted. I thought it was the other way around. So let's just fix that. Andy is feeling anger towards Chalky because he made them lose the match. He misinterpreted what needed to happen as a goalie. All right. In frame 1.3. Question 1.3, how do Chalky's body language and facial expression, so now we're looking at two aspects, right? The body language as well as facial expression. Now remember, our exam competence is verbal cues, all right, as well as visual cues. So in this case, we're looking at the visual clues, all right? So let's see our response and what it identifies. The body language. Can you see the outstretched hand, all right, at how he's appealing to Chalky? He's saying, please, I didn't know how this happens, all right? See how he's following Andy around. He's walking behind him as if to say, this is not what I intended, all right? His shoulders are slumped and the one arm is hanging rather limply on the side, okay? So remember, Chalky is this little figure that we are talking about, right? His facial expression, his eyes are looking downward, so it's downcast eyes, and his mouth is drooping and it's turned down. So if you look at the very specific way in which the cartoonist represented the drawing of that mouth there, okay? So remember, you have to give me two, so you could give me one option for body language and then another option for facial expression, okay? Let's move on. Frame 2, question 1.4. Why is the word stop written in bold capital letters? So remember, we're locating ourselves, and so we're locating ourselves in frame 2, okay? So what is Andy saying? If you want to be useful in the game, you have to stop the opponent. So I want you to notice, learners, can you see that all the other font or diction is written in capital letters? However, the word stop, although written in capital letters, is bolder and larger, all right? I want you to take note of that because that means this question wants you to respond to why stop is bolder as well as larger than the other print. So the solution says he is emphasizing, all right? He's putting emphasis on this point. He's driving this point home, all right, that your role in the game was to stop the opponent and not allow them through to score goals, all right? So remember, whenever you're answering questions where you have to emphasize why something is written or presented in a certain way, make sure you're using the word emphasis or drive home the point of the cartoonist, all right? Let's move on to our next question. It says, refer to frame 2. Give a synonym for the word opponent, all right? So remember, we always have to locate ourselves in the text, and we're locating ourselves in frame 2, okay? So after we've read, we want to specifically find a word for opponent. Now remember, sometimes you may not know the specific word for a synonym for that specific word, right? So what you do is you try to gather information from what you have in front of you. So we know, all right, that soccer or football is played with two teams, and there's one team that is to score on the opposite side of the opponent. Okay, so in this case, you know that opponent is the team on the other side. All right, so it's not on your own team. It's the team that's playing against you. All right, so you in your mind try to figure out, how am I going to find a word that means something similar to that? All right, the team playing against me. So let's look at the options they've given in the responses. It says it's a contender, all right, so the person playing against you, or an adversary, all right, who's adverse to what you are doing, or a challenger, all right, it's challenging your team or your skill, and then a foe or an opposer. So remember, it's very easy if you try to find the meaning derived from the cartoon and what you have in front of you. Okay, learners, we are going to take a short little ad break. I will see you when we get back. Learners, welcome back from your little snack break. We will now review what we've covered in the lesson for cartoon analysis. Remember, we focused on reading and viewing, and in this instance, we specifically looked at visual text. All right? Remember, in our cartoon analysis, we featured on the features of the cartoon, the integration of visual elements, as well as cartoon analysis. And remember how we went through the different stages. When we looked at our keywords, all right, we specifically identified cartoon humor as well as gestures and tone. And remember, we said it's not going to be ha-ha funny, the humor. It's going to be irony or dry humor. Remember, we distinguish between visual and verbal cues, all right, as well as verbal and non-verbal communication. Right, what did we find? That learners find it difficult to recognize the features of a cartoon and the skill to respond to these questions, all right? They also lack the correct vocabulary to respond to questions based on verbal as well as visual clues. And then they struggle to interpret the facial expressions as well as the body gestures. And remember, when you identifying the humor in the cartoon, you must be able to articulate that in words. So you need to use the correct vocabulary in order to express the humor. Okay. Remember, for our exam writing competencies, all right, you have to be able to read your cartoon very clearly, all right. Critical thinking skills are essential. Remember, your time management in exams becomes very important, okay? You must be able to identify those visual clues in the cartoon because they allow you to respond to the questions, okay? Analyze, interpret the humor, all right? Find the punchline using persuasive and emotive language, all right? Remember, there's always feeling words that the cartoonists use in order to portray what he's trying to communicate. And then the features of the cartoon, because you must be able to respond to questions based on the features of a cartoon, all right? And all of these will stand you in good stead when you need to respond to questions based on cartoons and your skills that you need to acquire. Remember, you can go through past question papers because you need to practice, all right? Practicing with past question papers allows you to put whatever we've discussed in the lesson and whatever we try to convey, you'll be able to put that in practice independently. So please use the following question papers just to guide you and to hone your skill, all right? So remember, your cartoon is usually question 4 of the question paper, and that will be able to guide you and you get familiar with the kind of questions that examiners put out on cartoons, all right? Learners, we want to thank you for joining us. This wraps up our lesson on cartoons, and we're looking forward to join you shortly and hope you do well in all your practice and preparation for examinations.